Hello my friends and welcome to a brief video in which I will talk about Hellblade, the story of the game and my personal opinions about the game, that last part of which will be rather quick. The reason I'm doing this video is because first of all this is one of those games where you don't really fully understand what happened because it's a bit more deep than that, a bit more complex, and sometimes for me at least it's good to have a bit of a summary of what exactly went on throughout the game and the ending and everything. And then second reason is because if you've seen my playthrough, then you will know that in the final video, in the final minutes, my voice recorder bugged, so there's no commentary for the last few minutes of the game, including the credits and everything. I had to cut out a very major portion of the game, of the video, because of this, because there's just no voice. And I said some of the things that I think there, and they obviously can't be in the video, so I want to include them here. So yeah, I'm gonna start from the beginning, obviously. First of all, the characters in this game, in case you missed or something, there are 5 characters worth mentioning. Well, just 5 characters in this game. First, number one, Senua, the main character, obviously. I'm gonna list them real quick and then I'm gonna start just going through it. Second character, Dillian, that's Senua's lover, partner, love interest, whatever you want to call him. He's the second character. Third character is Droot, who is basically a friend of Senua, who is the one that narrates the majority of the game and all of these lore objects you find, and that he talks about stories of the Norse mythology. That's him. That's Droot. I'll talk about him later as well. The fourth character is Galena. That's Senua's mother. And the fifth and final character is Zimbil, who is Senua's father, and he's also the main antagonist of the game, as much as you can have a main antagonist. And you will notice that I'm not mentioning Hewa or Surt or any of the bosses, and you will see why just in a bit. I will get to that. So first of all, you have Senua, the main character. She is a Celtic warrior from the tribe of the Picts, who is which is a branch of the Celts that lived in the, I think, 7th or 8th century. I'm not sure. I haven't really done any proper research for this video. I apologize. I'm just not that good. But yeah, and I think, as far as I know, the Roman Empire started taking over Europe, and the Celts were some of their, the opposition they faced, and they annihilated the Celts. But there was this one tribe or faction or whatever you want to call them, which were the Picts. They were the strongest, very much more savage than any others. So the Romans kind of left them alone, and they built this little wall, kind of, to create borders between them. And basically, it's implied that Senua is part of that. That she's a warrior, basically. She's part of a warrior tribe, so to speak, a strong one. And then she has, which is also the main focus of this entire game, she has psychosis. That is a very severe mental illness where, you I don't know, I need to explain what psychosis is. If you don't know, then you should probably Google it, because there's a lot more explanations you can find there instead of me talking about it. And I'm not a doctor anyway. But it's a severe mental illness where you hear voices and you constantly are in fear and despair and doubt, and you're very confused in general, and it's not your fault, and it's horrible. Especially after playing this game. I already knew, but after playing this game, it's a horrible thing and very scary. So she's suffering from that basically from birth. And she, her mother, Galena, Galena, or however you pronounce it, I'm sorry, she also has this, and which is probably why Senua has it, because it's she, got it from genetically. Her mother was a member of the tribe, and she was a priestess, and she started hearing these voices in her mind and being tormented by them. And eventually, because this is the 8th or 7th century or something like that, there's no doctors or proper medication that can be taken, or analysis or therapy. So these people obviously started thinking stuff like, they were very religious as well. So they thought that her mother thought that she can hear the dead, that she can communicate with the dead because of these voices that she was hearing. She thought that's just the dead talking to her, and she became a priestess and stuff like that, a more spiritual person in the tribe. However, Senua's father, Zimbo, who apparently is eventually revealed to be a very major zealot, fanatical zealot that just supports the gods, and he thinks that this psychosis, this is a darkness, it's a curse, that she's cursed by the underworld, by the gods of death and all that, and that it's a horrible thing to have. And then he At the beginning of the game, Senua thinks that her mother committed suicide because eventually she just couldn't handle this darkness that she had, aka the illness, and she ended up taking her own life because she just couldn't escape from it. Like no matter what she did, she couldn't escape. And her father filled her head with the lies, eventually revealed to be lies, that her mother did horrible things and a lot of bad things happened to the tribe and just in general, and it was all her mother's fault, and eventually Senua's fault because she has the same problem, and that her mother finally decided to take the easy way out and commit suicide, so to speak, as per her father's word at least. And yeah, and then he was supposedly being very protective of her because people from the tribe and the villages were really hateful of her mother, Senua's mother, and Senua herself, that they had the darkness and the curse, and they were very scared. And her father was keeping her closed off away from people in a room with a lot of runes, which I'm guessing is connected to the fact that he's a zealot, that he's a fanatic about the gods. And it's um, since Senua was a child, she believed that he was protecting her because that's what he was saying, and she had no reason not to believe him because he's her father. Um, but eventually, she found a way to kind of, she wanted to challenge this darkness and to find out more because she's a warrior and she has it in her. So she started sneaking out every now and then and to watch people, to watch them, just to to explore and to observe and stuff like that. And then that's how she eventually met Dillion, the fourth character of the story. And Dillion was a warrior who was usually training in a certain spot underneath the tree, which you see in one of the flashbacks. He was training there, preparing for some tournament and stuff like that. And he was just a very brave and strong warrior. And she kind of admired him, and she basically used his training to learn how to be a fighter herself. No one taught her, like in proper training. She taught herself by looking at him. But then one day he saw her, they met, and eventually fell in love with each other. Her father found out about this. He beat her. He told her that it's wrong and that she's cursed and she's gonna end up hurting Dillion and everyone around him. And then one day there was a plague which hit the village. And as you can imagine, plagues were something that wasn't exactly uncommon back then. It would just happen, and it just happens. It's just they don't have like medicine and stuff to defend themselves. So when a plague hits, a lot of people die. So a lot of people did die, including Dillion's father. And everyone naturally blamed Senua because she's cursed and she has the darkness and it's all her fault. And she was devastated and blamed herself. And even Dillion, in her memory at least, Dillion yelled at her as well that it was all her fault because his father died and he was upset, which eventually is implied not to be true, but I'll get to that in a bit. And so she's just living in this nightmare world where she not only has psychosis and has these voices, but also everyone around her hates her and fears her and just shuns her and everything. And then she sets out on a journey to. She goes away after this incident to kind of find herself to try to defeat the darkness or something like that, which is where she meets Droot, who is he reveals himself as a scholar who used to be a warrior, but he was captured, and then he managed to escape his captors, and he was almost dead. But Senua finds him, helps him, and then he becomes her friend. And he is also very knowledgeable on the Norse mythology and stuff, and he talks to her about the gods and everything, and that's why you hear his voice throughout the game because he's knowledgeable and he has been the one that has been teaching her all these things throughout her life. So naturally, she remembers him above anyone else when it comes to these things. And then when she comes back, however, it is revealed that the village was raided by the what is very, very, very heavily implied to be Vikings, because they also kind of were on a rampage around those times in the 8th century. And Vikings raided the village, they pillaged, they killed, and then Dillion, being the strongest warrior of the village, was sacrificed to the Viking gods. And this is something I did not realize when I first saw it, but then when I watched it again, I realized and I was like, Jesus, how did I not see this? Because I've seen the Vikings TV show and I'm aware of the Vikings as a faction and as a people in history books. And they basically sacrifice him by brutally executing him with something called the blood eagle. And if you don't know what that is, that's basically when a man gets tied up His spine is ripped open, and then his ribs are cut, like pulled out, and then his lungs are pulled out. And it's disgusting. It's painful. It's horrible. It is just horrifying. And then he's let hanging like that, which is how she sees him in one of the visions. That's how he dies. It's horrible and just traumatic. And then that pushes her even further into the darkness, into her illness. She becomes even more desperate. Like despair takes over. She blames herself for everything because that's how she was taught to blame herself. It's all her fault apparently. And then she goes on on a journey. And this is where the confusing part probably happens for a lot of people, including me. Like, she goes to Helheim, which is basically the land of the dead, right? So that's what it's basically hell, because there's Valhalla and there's Helheim, and Valhalla is kind of like the heaven where heroes go. Where if you've been a hero or a brave warrior in your life, you go there to like live. You know about Valhalla. Everyone's heard about it, at least to some extent. And Helheim is the opposite. Hell is like hell. It's like the Norse version of hell, basically. And she goes there because she thinks that because Dillian was suffering because of his father's death and the way he was brutally and forcefully murdered. His soul is suffering, and that his only chance of being free and at peace is if she takes his skull to Helheim and just cleanses his soul, because that's what she was taught to believe by her father and by Druid's stories about the mythology about the gods. However, this whole journey is not really real though. It takes place in her head, and at the core of it is her psychosis, and basically the goddess of death, Hela, who is described to be the main antagonist of the story, but it's actually by the end of the game you kind of find out that Hela is actually the manifestation of Senua's disease, her illness, her psychosis, um, which I'll get to in a bit when I talk about the bosses of the game. And then she goes on a journey, especially notable in the section of the game where you have to collect the shards to recreate the weapon, because she fights against the darkness, and she fights against for example, there's a section of the one of the sections is a labyrinth where she's going through a labyrinth, and the only way to do it is if you listen. Even the voices, the game tells you that you need to listen for Dillian's voice, because he's the one that guides you towards the end of the puzzle. And that's kind of a interpretation, that's like a metaphor for her illness, because she hears so many voices, but the only one that has always been true and pure, and the only one that's ever really cared about her and saw her for what she is, like a good person and not this cursed freak, was Dillian. And that's why his voice is the one you need to follow, and he's the one that helps her. So that's like a metaphor of saying that Dillian is the guy, is the person that's always been there whenever she goes into her darkness and she falls into a state of despair and doubt, self-doubt. He's the one that's always helped her get out of it. And this level is that, basically, is a physical manifestation of that, experience that she has had throughout her life while he was alive. Then the other one is a tower, which it's not the tower itself that's the focus. It's just the fact that you have to switch between present time and past time to solve the puzzle. And there's basically, this is for me, interpretation is that it's the fact that she lives in the past about all the things that she supposedly did, all the cursed events that happened that were her fault. Then you have the one with the darkness where that's obvious. Like, the darkness where you're blind is like her inner blindness, because she has no idea where she's going. She's so confused and doubting herself and questioning everything that she ever knew, basically, because of her father mostly. So she feels like she's blind. That's also, all of these are inner struggles that she's having. And then she recreates the sword, which is basically not really a physical sword, but it's like a sword that you can use to defeat the darkness. That's basically, it's all about her inner struggle to overcome her psychosis and all all the doubt and darkness that illness casts on her as a person. And Dillian is the only one. That's why you don't see his body properly. You see a glowing figure, because that's how she sees him. He's the only ray of light that she ever knew, and that guides her always throughout the darkness in her life until his death, unfortunately. And it's also revealed in one of these flashbacks that when he supposedly yells at her that she is cursed. The only time when he actually seems to be agreeing with her father and everyone else is when his father dies. But that's actually debunked later because he says that that didn't really happen, and that she hallucinated the fact that he yelled at her because she was just blaming herself. So he never really yelled. He was never really upset with her, and thought that he never lost his belief that she is a good person, that she's not cursed. And she just made herself believe that because of her guilt, that it was her fault because, as I said several times, she was taught to believe that she's at fault for everything bad that happened, including the plague. So then she finds the weapon, and then it's all about Hela, and the bosses. So the three bosses you face in this game, and I'm not counting Hela because she's kind of a separate encounter in the end. So you have Surt, Valravan, and Garm, I think. Sorry if I don't remember that's true. I think Garm. So Surt is fire, Valravan is illusion, and Garm is darkness. That's the theme of each of these bosses. So fire, to explain this, I need to tell you about the revelation that happens eventually, that Hela's mother, sorry, Senua's mother, doesn't actually commit suicide. It's revealed later in the game that her father, Senua's father, Zimbel, is the one that basically gets her killed because he beats her. He tries to literally physically beat the illness out of her because he thinks that she's cursed by the evil gods, which she obviously isn't because she's just ill and you can't just beat the illness out of her. But he doesn't know that. So he beats her repeatedly, and then eventually he sets out a witch hunt. The whole village rallies around him, and they burn her as a witch. Like, they burn her alive as a witch. And Senua witnesses this, but she kind of blocks it in her mind because of her father's stories and the way he talks to her, and she just refuses to acknowledge the fact that this happened until later in the game when she actually unlocks this memory. And the fact that there's fire, Surt, is that this is her memories coming out about the fire, about the fact that her mother was burned, and it's just the memories trying to come out, and but you don't know at that point what exactly is the case. Then you have Ravan with the illusions. That one is obvious because she constantly doubts herself, and the whole theme of the levels before Valravan and during the boss, the game tells you to progress in the game and in the boss fight itself. You need to focus, the actual mechanic of focusing in the game. That's really clever because that's actually the way that she has to overcome it in reality. She needs to focus her mind to overcome these doubts and these illusions that are constantly in her mind because of her illness. And then you have the darkness of Garm, which is the more direct, blunt problem, the more obvious problem that she's facing. Well, I mean, the darkness is the darkness. We've talked about it already. That's her psychosis. That's all of the darkness that overcomes her all the time because of her illness, and that she can't see. She gets blind because that's what happens in the boss fight. You can't see. You get these images in your screen, and she defeats all of these demons. And the reason I think that these enemies are from the Norse mythology, and all the enemies that she fights, the fodder enemies, I think they're supposed to represent Vikings because Vikings are the ones that raid the village and kill Dillion. So she's also heard about them from Drut. So she naturally believes that they're the enemy and they're these evil demons and these dangerous enemies that she needs to overcome. And that's why I think all the enemies in the game are from the Norse mythology, including the fodder enemies that you fight throughout the game with the shields and all that. They're supposed to represent the Vikings that she's heard about and that raid the village. And then you get to Hela in the end, and Hela, a funny fact and a little thing that I really frustrated me during the fight itself, which you didn't hear because there was no voice, but it was that you can't actually fight, you can't actually hit Hela, you can't hit her. She's just standing there, and you constantly hear these voices telling you, give up, it's over, don't, you can't do this." And that's because Hela is her psychosis manifested in physical form. Like, Hela is the core of her problem. Right in the middle, standing there, you can't defeat it. You can't just slash at it and defeat it and make it go away. And then you have these continuous flux of enemies overcoming or coming over and over to you. And this is the whole point of the fight, that you need to let yourself die, which I didn't realize at first. But then eventually, I died not on my own will. I just got overwhelmed, which is the point. You're supposed to die in that fight because you're just constantly fighting all these enemies that are just overflowing, and this is the representation of her problems, of her issues, her doubts, constantly overflowing her, coming from the source, which is just standing there, Hewa, aka the psychosis, which is the source of all the issues. And then she decides that in order to defeat this, she needs to make a sacrifice, and that's why she lets herself die, which I didn't actually do in the game because I tried to fight them indefinitely but failed. But anyway, she's supposed to let herself die. She gets slashed, she falls to the ground, and then she basically gets overwhelmed by emotion. At first she curses at Hela, but then she begs for Dillian's life because she's so confused. Like, her mind is just completely going crazy. Not to be offensive about it, I'm just saying that it's going all these places. Like, she can't control it properly. And then eventually Hela stabs her and kills her, and it seems like Senua is dead and she failed. But then when the Hela picks up the skull of Dillian and throws it off the edge, and then it's revealed that Hela is actually Senua herself, then you kind of, this is where the realization happens that it's a simple case of um, Senua, the older, weaker Senua dies, and the newer one comes out. So in a way, and then you see Hela lying on the ground. So basically, what happens is Senua does not successfully destroy the psychosis. She doesn't. You can't just do that. That's unrealistic to say that she just defeated her illness just like that and it's over. No, but by the end of the game, it's very heavily implied and like shown that she has suppressed it massively and that she is in control. She did not let the psychosis take over her, and she is in control now, and she's managing it much better than before. Although it's still there, but she's in control, which is the whole point of the game. That's her journey, and this whole world, which is not, which is hell. You know, Helheim is hell. This is the world that she creates for herself in her mind, and that is why it's hell. And the fact that it's not the hell in the Bible, but instead of the Norse hell version, is because of the time and the place where she lives, and the fact that she's connected to the Vikings in the Norse mythology. That's what she knows. If she was connected to monks from the Christians and stuff, then maybe we would have seen her fight Lucifer or something. Who knows? That my point is that she created the hell that she knew from the stories in her mind, and that's why we're fighting these specific enemies. But in the end of the day, the hell that she creates, it's her own hell in her own mind, which she has to overcome. And then in the end, Hela is Senua, and Senua is Hela because she is at the core of the problem. The core of the problem is her mind, and she has to defeat the weaker one and let the stronger one take over, which is what happens. And she kind of manages to overcome that problem that she has. And then finally about Jute, there is something that I didn't do in the game because I found out eventually when I was doing some research to see if I missed something, that apparently if you collect every single one of those stone tablets, which talks about the story, they're like the collectibles in the game. If you collect every single one of them, then in the end, when you get across the bridge and you get to the final boss, there's a special cutscene that plays of Jute, who appears to you and tells you something. And basically, the Jude's story in general is that the fact that he's supposedly a warrior who was part of another tribe, another one from the Celts or whatever, and then Vikings came again. He tried to fight them off, but he failed. He got captured by them. He was tortured and abused physically, but then he managed to escape. He went kind of crazy because of the whole ordeal, but he was also a scholar who knew about it. He learned from them about their gods and everything. That's why he was so knowledgeable about the Norse. And then he was almost dead, and then Senua found him, and then he eventually died, but he taught her all these things that he knew. But then in this cutscene, so this thing I described now is what Senua thinks she knows. But then what happens in the cutscene, the special cutscene, is that he appears to her and reveals that, and this is something that she knew obviously in the past because this is all in her mind, but she just suppressed the memory, and now she remembers it in this cutscene, is that he is not really a warrior. He was a coward, and he sold out his people just so he can survive. But they captured him anyway, and they didn't kill him for this reason, but they captured him and kept him as a slave. And then he escaped after all and made it. But he's not a brave warrior who defended his people. He was a coward and sold them off, just hoping that he will be spared. So he's not the hero that he thinks he is, that Senua thought he is. And then he also tells her something very important, that basically the same thing happened in her own village, and that there was a dark hooded man who sold off people to the Vikings, and then he was the one that let them come in. and do what they want, do what they did. And it's very, very, very heavily implied that that man is Zimbo, Senua's father, because in the next scene you see him with a dark hood, and you're like, okay. And so basically, Senua's father is the one that led the Vikings there. He was selling people off as slaves from his own people. He's the one that killed Senua's mother and made Senua believe that her mother was weak and committed suicide. He made her believe that she was cursed and that everything bad that happens has her fault. And he was a horrible piece of shit. And to the very end, he talks to her about how she should give up, but she refuses, and then she overcomes. So in a way, Zimbo Zimbo and the psychosis are kind of Hela. They're the manifestation of the everything bad in her mind that she needs to beat, and she does in the end. And that's how she survives. And then she also lets go of Dillian because she throws his skull away, and she has to let go of this part of herself that has been tormenting her for so many years because she just realized that it's not about saving his soul. It's just she has to let go of him if she wants to move on and just be okay or be better with her illness. So I think that's the story of Hellblade, guys. This was already a 26-minute video, so I'm not gonna really talk about my opinion too much because I didn't want this video to be that long, but too late. So yeah, I really like the game. The fact that I'm making this video in itself means that I appreciate the game enough to make this video and kind of talk about it because I really liked the story. I really liked the gameplay. I think it was great, really enjoyable experience. A bit short, but just about enough length to really show this problem. And it's also something very commendable that they went into so much detail, which is something a subject that's very, I wouldn't say taboo, but it's something really tricky, very delicate that not a lot of game developers would touch upon because obviously it's very difficult to represent this kind of illness in a video game. But if you're gonna represent it, a video game is probably the best way to do it because you're in control, you're there, you can get immersed in the whole thing and just kind of exactly find out what it feels like, at least to some extent, to be in that position. And I think, as far as I know, the people in the development team, Ninja Theory, they also kind of recruited the help of not only people suffering from psychosis, which were part of these therapy groups, but also professors from universities and medical facilities that I forgot the actual word for the doctors that deal with psychosis. Sorry, I don't want to embarrass myself by pronouncing it badly, but they also employed these kind of people to come in and give them advice and kind of guide them into helping them shape the game to be as the best possible representation of this problem that people can actually find out. And it really worked because, at least for me, I really have a better understanding of this, and it's really scary. And I can really sympathize with people that have this now after playing this game. So it's really cool that a video game kind of makes me appreciate and just sympathize with people that have this issue more because I obviously can't imagine how it feels like. I've never had anything of the sort, but it's just it really showcases how scary and deep rooted this problem is. And I hope that the medicine develops further into eventually helping people get better easier from this. That's all I can say about it. Like, the less of this we see in the world, the better. So yeah, great game, great story. I hope this video helped you a little bit to understand at least what happened. I'm not the best at explaining these things because I tend to ramble a little bit like I'm doing at this exact moment. But if I did, then that's great. If not, then I'm sorry, but I'm sure you can find other places in the internet that we can read a summary of the story if this video didn't help you. So yeah, thank you for watching. This was the last video I'm making on Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. And as you already see, there's other games on the channel which I'm gonna be uploading. And if this game has a sequel, then I would love to play it and upload it. And until then, I hope you have a good day. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.